In this next segment, Rob and I talk about everything from Zephyr Wellness to Walk the Talk America and what we're doing in the near future to bring mental health professionals and gun culture together. And we also hit on some philosophies about training and just life in general. Okay, Zephyr Wellness is basically a organization or a company that had, they're therapists. And Jake from Zephyr Wellness, and also he's the host of a show called Noggin Notes, contacted me and asked if I wanted to come on his podcast, which was kind of nice because it was the first time someone outside of gun culture had asked me to come on a podcast. We've been asked to speak at mental health events, which we did in Kentucky, but I've never been asked on a show. I think that's the biggest thing, is trying to break through to the so-called other side. That's what I'm looking forward to in the future, and I hope more people take the Jake route and gamble on having the gun guy or the ungun gun guy on there, or you or somebody else from our organization to talk about mental health, firearms, and what we're doing.
Right. One of the problems, it seems like, when and I think we've talked about this a little bit, but I don't know if it really resonates as much with people who don't understand the difference between someone who was, like, for example, a police officer, or someone maybe even who was in the military, and someone who's part of the gun community and part of the private sector firearms community. So, like, even when you watch, CNN or Fox News, and they have somebody like 30 years of the FBI talking about guns in America, their perspective is skewed, right? Like, my dad was a cop, and for him, the gun was just a tool, right? And I know the perspective is skewed. I'm not saying that there aren't gun people inside of the law enforcement or military community, but to assume, as an outsider in the mental health community or anywhere else in journalism, that someone who uses the tool as an armed professional understands or represents the gun community really is a flaw.
True. I agree with that. I mean, it makes complete sense to me. Do you ever get this? Do you ever get, when you start talking about Walk Talk America, people automatically throw it on first responders?
Oh, for sure. No, people, exactly. They were right back to visualizing a cop as a gun person, or guns and cops, as
Right.
opposed to understanding it. There's this now, ever growing. I mean, in our lifetime, we've gone from, almost zero, relatively speaking, right? So if the population of our country in the 70s was 80 million, and we had a million people, maybe, probably not, that carried guns concealed or even had a license to carry a gun concealed in the states that were shall issue at the time, to now we move into the 2019 and we're looking at 14 states where if you can legally own a gun, you can legally carry it. So sure, our population has grown, but when you look at 1 million versus 80, right, and now we're looking at 30 million versus 360, 380 million, almost 10% of the country can carry a gun legally, whereas before it was, maybe 2% of the country could carry a gun legally. Huge difference.
Yeah, big difference. I think we both, one of the funny stories that when we first met, I think we both shared a story about you carried a Bersa.
Fair. I've always said my first legal carry gun was a Bersa 380. Period.
Okay, to be fair to you.
So, yeah, like, I've never claimed that it was the first gun I ever carried in public, right?
Right.
Because growing up in Jersey and being a gun kid and being in the guns and being stupid and being a typical teenager, picking up where we left off, how do you envision Zephyr Wellness and Walk the Talk America working together? Because obviously it's been like a great courtship, but now it's official.
Right.
What do you see as, if not the fruits of this 5 years ago, what's the method, what's the intention?
Well, I think the sky's the limit when it comes to what we can do, because Jake is so open to working with us on projects that help educate and, the continuing education of everything that they're about, right? What a therapist is about and understanding. What I'm really interested in is making a curriculum that we can take maybe around, obviously you're a tour guy. You like to go around the country and live like a
mostly homeless nomad. I think that's the word I'm looking for.
Homeless nomad. Yeah, that's the phrase I was looking for. But that's something that we can take and help educate and kind of bridge that gap between the so-called two sides. If we're going to fear therapists and counselors, their ability to take our guns, then I think we need to definitely bring the two together to talk about that because there's education on both sides, right?
Right, for sure. And I think, and right here you've got Pirelli's book, and we both, have been, dealing with that and pushing that out on people and sort of using it as a perfect example of somebody from the other side, quote unquote, the mental health side of this equation, that came in and said, I don't know anything about guns. He intellectually said, how can I make a judgment on whether or not someone should be trusted with a gun if I don't really understand what that means and what it means to have a gun and all that? Let me go learn about gun world. And I think, what you came to me with was, I don't really even know where to start with the mental health side, what that means. It seems like a good idea, but maybe we need to talk to mental health professionals. Of course, our work with Mental Health America, the people we've talked to, the other people we've met, people who are professional. Richard Egan's perfect example here locally for you. Mm-hmm. But now this gives us another ally who is clearly on the mental health side, neutral to firearms, maybe pro firearms, maybe pro gun control. I'm not sure how you put Jake into a box. All I know is he is absolutely for sure a mental health professional who's interested in what we're doing, and that's an asset we need, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually, when I went on his show, that was what was the breath of fresh air, is that he understood where I was coming from in the sense of not being a gun guy per se, but understanding the gun culture, but then also having a soft spot obviously for mental health because of the things that I've dealt with in my past, and the people I've lost or the people I've seen kind of go off the deep end and never come back. So that's one of the cool things about Jake, and being bold enough to take that risk. And what I'm excited about is when we released the press release and just the feedback, the messages, the private messages I was getting from people, it was all positive. And I was expecting some people to say, oh, here we go, we're going to invite them right into our ranges, and that fear mongering that always happens. It's like, stop, knock it off. Like, no, this is our time to shine, and vice versa, right? And get rid of some of those misconceptions that are out there, that all these therapists and counselors are just these, boogeymen that are walking around, boogeymen and women just going to steal your guns, or this is our secret way of infiltrating what you guys have got going on and take our gun rights away. No, absolutely not. I'm not comparing myself to a therapist by any means, but I look at it as the same way. When I went into gun culture, I knew nothing. I was a Jersey kid, city boy. I mean, I had never shot, hunted, done anything else like that. I shot a gun a couple times, but that was really it. It was trial by fire. So I had that same type of, I'm trying to look for the word for it. It's just, when you come into something and you're nervous, and I faked my way through a lot of it. I had a lot of anxiety. There you go.
Yeah.
The first time I went to a gun range and I was around gun professionals, because they assumed I knew, and my ego wouldn't let me be weak. I just watched what they were doing and copied it. Which which is funny, because if you look at it, that's really not the smartest thing to do when dealing with a firearm. But my ego wouldn't let me say, "Hey guys, I have no clue what I'm doing." Right? That's what I want to do. I think this is what we can do together with Zephyr Wellness, is create a space where, if someone comes and tells that story first to a bunch of mental health professionals, I think that's inviting. Right?
It is. Yeah, it is. It's terms like safe space and all that are used pejoratively and probably overused in our community, in our culture these days. But really, that's what we're trying to do. It's okay to not know. It's okay to be ignorant, right? And ignorant is one of those tricky words. It's not a pejorative word. It's just a descriptive, factual word. I don't know this, or hey, you may be ignorant of these facts. You haven't been exposed to them. You don't know this. So being able to raise your hand and saying, I don't know, is to me just a mark of integrity. And the problem is the value that's placed on not being insecure, or not being uninformed, that not having an open mind, really. Honestly, like, people value opinion, right? Like, what do you think about this? And if you say at the bar, or you say at the park, or you say at the lunch table, or you say in the bleachers at your kid's sports event, I don't really have an opinion on that because I haven't researched it enough. you're not even part of the conversation. And something's wrong with that. Like, we need to be able to say, I don't know. Tell me about it. What do you know? Or can you point me to some resources, right? And that's what this alliance, I think, is we can give them resources for gun culture stuff and for the technical issues of guns. And Zephyr Wellness can come in and give us resources and give us insight and give us knowledge on the mental health side, because that's where, obviously, gun community is lacking. But it's very fair to say that the mental health professionals are lacking in understanding guns and gun culture, and that's why you have this potential animosity, right? It's much easier to say, as a mental health professional, I'm sure, like, well, gee, if there were no guns, people couldn't be killed by guns, so how about I just resist guns being in the world? I get that. I don't agree with it, but I get that.
What do you think? That's always, it fascinates me. What is it about people not being able to say, I don't know? Some people have an answer for everything.
Yep.
And they feel like they have. I mean, maybe it's like not letting somebody down or something, you know?
I don't know. I mean, you could. That's probably the most. That's like that is absolutely the Mike Sodini like approach to that. Like you're like, hey, I feel like you're trying to pretend you know something you don't, so that you don't make me sad, right? As opposed to Rob, where I'm like, you don't want to look like an idiot. You think I'm going to judge you as an idiot for raising your hand and saying I don't know. But like that couldn't be further from the truth, right? I'm going to judge you for being an idiot for pretending you don't know. Or sorry, pretending you do know when you don't, right? Or guessing. Or worse yet, giving me like this uninformed opinion or partially informed opinion that you're super adamant about and that you won't even begin to question, right? Like I teach, right? So when I start a class, I tell people, look, I'm going to tell you, you're paying me with your time, with your focus, with your, I don't even, the money, I mean, the money's there. But honestly, if you just gave up a day or 2 days or 3 days or 4 days or 5 days of your life to show up and listen to me, then that's what you're giving me, right? The money is kind of how we all make it happen. As far as I'm concerned, that greases the wheels. That makes it possible for me to stand there for 3 days and tell you things based on my 20, 30 years of research and experience and, you know, dedication to helping you understand the topics we're going to cover today better. But if that doesn't magically make me able to stand there just because I have that information, right? I have to go like work at McDonald's if there isn't some money involved. But you're not paying me with the money, because you could buy my book. You could buy a subscription, a platinum membership at PDN. Like, there's other ways to make money. I'm standing there with you because we're both putting our time and effort and energy into this. And if you show up thinking you know it all, and that this is just like some kind of day you're not at work and you get to be at the gun range, seriously, go to the gun range. It's cheaper, $30 an hour. You can get the gun range, right? Like, don't come to me at hundreds of dollars an hour potentially and think that you're going to get a pat on the back because you tried or because you pretended to know something you didn't. So when somebody raises their hand and has an opinion because they don't want to not have an opinion because I'm going to judge them negatively, they're so misreading the situation and or me. I would much rather you raise your hand as an educator and say, you know what, I don't know this. I admit that I don't know this. And in fact, I'm coming here because I don't know it and I recognize the value in knowing it. So I start the class by saying, look, I'm going to tell you what I think. That's what you're paying me for. You're compensating me with your attention by telling you, you know, letting me tell you what I think. I owe you that. I might be wrong. And there's always this like kind of like head tilt sometimes with guys that are really listening to that opening kind of speech I give in the morning where, well, why am I paying you if you're wrong? Well, I don't know I'm wrong, right? Like, I don't know what I don't know. I'm going to tell you the best thing I think I can tell you. I'm going to give you the best information I can. I'm going to provide the best information I have, but I may be wrong simply because I don't know you, or I don't know your circumstances, or I don't know some other technique, or I don't know about the gun you brought works differently than any other gun I've ever seen. I mean, the further I go into this community, right, the further I go into this career and this profession, the less likely it is. But if you go back to like 1997 and I'm like, hey, you should do this, and some guy's looking at me like I'm an idiot because his gun doesn't have that lever, or the gun, the magazine release is different, or the holster is different. Like, oh, I'd never seen that holster before. Sorry, that's bad information. But based on the principle that I gave you that first piece of advice, here's the new piece of advice I'm going to give you, right? And I think that's what's missing from the conversation is people need to have a set of principles, a set of guiding underlying concepts. You know, I use integrity, efficiency, and consistency, right? Like those are that's ICE, that's the name of my company. And I have to ask somebody, like, is that more efficient I don't care if the Navy SEALs taught you. I don't care if your dad taught you. I don't care if you made it up in the basement. I need to look at it objectively with a set of principles and not worry about the detail level first. And that's what I think people get screwed up on, is they don't have a set of guiding principles. They just have this, like, they have to have an opinion, or they have to pretend they know something, or they have to pick up their phone and immediately, like, go to the search engine and say, yeah, I'm reading the definition now. No, I don't agree with that. Like, well, I mean, honestly, dude, that was 30 seconds of research, quote unquote. Like, you can't write a book on the topic. How much are you gonna risk your life on 30 seconds of research? Or are you gonna put time into this? Like, it's okay to be ignorant as long as you have the intention of figuring things out, finding things out. And that's what's missing.
How often do you, as an instructor, trainer, or educator, how often do you find yourself coming off of what you thought of before, what you thought was the right way? Like how Zephyr Wellness and what we're doing is about continuing education, right? How often do you find yourself saying, now I used to preach that, now I've moved off of that and I'm onto this?
Well, I think less and less. And I think that's the idea, right? I mean, there's all kinds of, if you go back to like ancient wisdom, there's these chronological marks of life experience and life station, kind of where you are in life, right? And one of the Eastern philosophies says, you spend your first 40 years learning about the world, you spend the next 40 years learning about yourself, and then you spend the last 40 years trying to help others, right? And it's, so I don't know if those timelines are right, I mean, you think about how much we can learn in 30 seconds, we can get a definition of a word, whereas, instead of like hiking across your continent to find a scroll, like okay, I go to my smartphone, like boom. So maybe you spend the first 20 years learning about the world and the next 20 years learning about yourself, and then however long you live trying to make Earth better or influence other people or whatever. Like you have to have a baseline, and I think that's what that philosophy of I have to have a base. And if I don't understand the world, if I don't understand physics, if I don't understand gravity, if I don't understand why trees grow, if I don't understand where fruit comes from, if I don't understand like why how babies are made, like if you don't understand these things, you're gonna have a hard time like being part of the earth, right? So you have to learn things. You have to establish a baseline. Once you have those things learned, then you have to understand how you relate to those things, or how you're going to use those things, or how you're going to interact with those facts, those things, the objectivity. And that to me is your philosophy, right? That's your worldview. Mm-hmm. That's the underlying principles and concepts you're talking about. So once you've established the underlying principles, I mean, the physics isn't going to change, right? So when I'm standing on a range with people, like magazine release, to go back to firearms, right? Like when you push the little button on the gun, the magazine's going to fall out towards Earth. It's never going to fall up. It's never going to fall sideways. I can flick the gun to the side and try to make it go sideways. I can use my offhand, right? If I'm holding the gun in my right hand, I can use my left hand to pull the magazine out and throw it to the left. But what I can't do is change gravity. So if I understand gravity, and if gravity can help me not need to use my hand to pull the magazine out of the gun, then I become more efficient by just pulling the gun in and hitting the button. So when am I going to change my mind about that? Like, I'm probably never going to change my mind about that philosophically, conceptually, because gravity's real, and using one hand to release a magazine is far better than using two. But when an individual student comes to me, and I had this happen like 3 weeks ago, a month ago, up in New Hampshire, student came in with an antiquated piece of equipment. So he had a gun where the magazine release, you couldn't actuate it with a strong hand. You had to the button was way down at the base of the palm, where no human finger on that hand could reach it.
Was he using a musket? Wait.
No, it was an old Beretta. So
really?
But when I say old Beretta, I mean 30 years.
30 years, right.
Like it's not ancient technology, but it's antiquated technology. So in other words, there's better ways to do it. But if that's the gun you brought to the class, I need to let you, quote unquote, like I need to advise you as the instructor, don't do it like everybody else is doing it. You need to take your weak hand, use your thumb, push that button in, and then let the magazine drop. So there's a delay. Your gun is less efficient in the pure sense, but for me to teach you how to be as efficient as possible with your gun, I need to teach you this way. But that's an application of a concept to a specific moment. You're asking me, when do I change my mind and say, no, never mind. We're not going to use gravity. We're going to instead forget gravity, and we're always going to use the weak hand. Those types of things, the reason I say less and less is because there's only so much more to learn, right? So again, to go back to the 90s, there was tanker trucks full of information that I hadn't been exposed to. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it neutral or irrelevant or antiquated or whatever. But as I've been involved in this community for so long, and I teach 50, 60 classes a year, and I deal with 1,000 individuals a year on the range, and that's been happening for a couple decades. And I'm a student, and I'm a peer with other instructors, and I'm a target for criticism from other instructors, and I'm inviting opinions from other instructors. As all these things are going on, I'm learning more and more and more. So the longer that goes on, the more information I've got in my head, the more I've been exposed to, and the less likely it is that someone's going to present a new piece of information that's going to make me change something incredibly significant or something incredibly important. So the changes become more and more subtle, more and more nuanced, and probably the biggest driver are things like crime trends and technology. So if the guns change, right, if a new holster design comes out, well, then that's going to influence, well, wow, that holster is better than every other holster that's ever been designed, so yeah, I'm going to use it.
Right.